This is Why Am I a Mets Fan? A podcast hosted by Samantha Croston and Ashley Wenskowski.
What's up? What's up from the Skycam? Hello, everybody, and welcome into the inaugural episode of Why Am I a Mets Fan podcast, a passion project that has been in the works for a while, but now it is finally here. This is a podcast that explores the reality of being a Mets fan, and we're going to bring you insight into the farm, the fascination, and the facts behind the New York Mets. This is my co-host and co-worker, Ashley Wenskowski. I'm Samantha Croston, and we are so excited to have you with us. But before we get into our backgrounds any further or what this podcast is about, we want to just let you know, as we will every episode, that you can find all of our episodes on your favorite podcast platform or on our YouTube channel at WhyMetsPod. You can also find us on social media, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. We're trying to be everywhere at that same handle, at WhyMetsPod. So let's just start by saying hi. Hi, Ashley.
Hi.
How are we feeling?
Hi. How's it going? We're finally
great.
here. Excited to be here. As you mentioned, we've been working on this for a while, hoping to get it started a little bit earlier on this season, but I'm just happy to be here, and I'm happy to be doing it with you. What's more perfect than this? Two Mets fans getting to talk about the Mets every week.
Right? So we're two lifelong Mets fans. We're both from the tri-state area, and we both work at the same company called CMY Central. So it's the NBC and CBS affiliate. It's the local news station here in Syracuse, New York. So yes, we're both Mets fans, but there's a little more to it than that. We're 10 minutes away from the Syracuse Mets. So that's sort of where we hope to bring you that inside access that you truly can't find anywhere else.
Totally. And this podcast will be weekly, talking about the big team, talking about our takes on, whatever's going on with the big club. But we will have a Syracuse Mets segment every week as well, talking about, prospects, anybody who's down, rehabbing, and also just the Syracuse Mets as a whole. And we have some great relationships over there with the guys who run the Syracuse Mets broadcast group and social media. So we're excited to work with them. But yeah, as Sam mentioned, we work at CNY Central. We're sports reporters here. And we both went to Syracuse as well. You for your master's, me undergrad, and now we just live here.
And we just live here, and we just work here, and we hang out here, and we do podcasts here. Before we get into a little bit more about what this podcast is about, let's just tell people about your background. How'd you even get here into broadcasting, the whole 9 yards?
Totally. Well, I think we have somewhat of a similar story. I knew I wanted to go into sports broadcasting ever since I was a little kid. It truly is like the cliche, like this is what I always knew I wanted to do story. And a lot of that for me was, at a hesitation of sounding too cheesy, was because I grew up watching the Mets every single day. Gary, Keith, and Ron literally were like the voice of my home, I want to say. Like
yes.
Every night I came in from whatever I was doing, 7:10, turned on the Mets. That was my night. As a kid. So they truly did spark a lot of that for me. And then when I graduated high school, I went to the Newhouse School at Syracuse, which both my parents are also graduates of. And I always knew I wanted to do sports. Nothing else was really in consideration for me. I interned here at CNY Central my senior year of college, and then was lucky enough to get this job that really just checked all the boxes for me out of school and was the perfect fit. So I love it here. I love talking about Syracuse, which is obviously, the school I was raised on. And then to have the Syracuse Mets here is just the icing on the cake.
I mean, it's unreal. And that's a big part of the reason why we came up with this idea. Similar story to you. I'm from Long Island. And by the way, I want to put you guys on blast that we also actually have a third person who will be helping out with this podcast, our intern Dan. We call him Intern Dan, and he's also a Long Island kid. So we're excited to have him on and see a couple of his takes. But anyway, I also listen, growing up, my dog was named Shay. I always like to bring that up. Like it was just a Mets household. And I think that it was something that just really brought me and my dad, but really me and my entire family closer together. And, I think growing up, my dad would sometimes look at like the sideline reporter and be like, I could see you doing something like that. But I feel like now we've really, and in general, we've just expanded upon those roles, doing sports anchoring, sports reporting, all of those kinds of things. But again, so getting back to this podcast and why we even started this, you may be wondering why we named it Why Am I a Mets Fan? But honestly, if you're a Mets fan, you might already know. We wanted to make this not only a podcast that's about the Mets and and, you know, a little bit about the X's and O's, but really we want this to be a Mets fan podcast. We want to talk about the things that are going on each week and that are, you know, what are people talking about on Twitter? What are the conversations? For example, why are people giving Francisco Lindor a standing ovation when he's in a slump? Why are the Mets 0-4 in their City Connect uniforms? Is there something strange going on there? Whatever the hottest topic of the week is, we want to talk about it because we love Mets Twitter so much.
Totally.
Because the highs are so high and the lows are so low, and I think that's what being a Mets fan is all about.
Totally. We want to hear from you. Why are you a Mets fan? Because that's such an interesting topic. It was actually our boss, Sean Carroll, who came up with the idea.
Shout out Sean.
Shout out Sean, who's our news director here at CNY Central. And I just thought it was a perfect name, right? Because that is Mets fans. I came up with the word in our description, tantalizing. It's one of the most tantalizing franchises in sports.
And that was a beautiful word.
And I really feel like that is the perfect word, right? I hear people say tortured. All right, like that's a little negative for me. Tantalizing is so true because it's a tortured fan base, doesn't get a lot of winning, but the highs are so high. And that's what I think brings people back to the Mets. I know a lot of people like you and I, you know, it comes from their upbringing. It comes from they're either from the tri-state area or their dad was a Mets fan or something like that. So, I think the origin story behind why people love the New York Mets is so interesting. And so we want to hear your story and we want to continue to share ours.
And you know what? If we are going to ask people for their stories, and I hope to make that a thing where when we bring guests on, we ask them why they're a Mets fan or why they're not a Mets fan, because I'm sure we'll have some of those on too. But why are you a Mets fan? And then I'll tell you why I'm a Mets fan so our viewers can know why we're passionate about it. If it wasn't obvious, we're both lifelong Mets fans, which is another reason why we started this podcast.
Born and raised. My dad, so I'm from New Jersey originally, but like grew up, went to high school and everything in Pennsylvania outside of Phillies country, which was rough in 2008 and it was a tough time. But anyway, my dad comes from a long line of Mets fans, just raised me and my sister to love the Mets. And I really took to it like literally from the age I could talk and like 6 years old. Like I remember like the Mets collapse in 2007 is literally one of my first sports memories, 2008. So it's a family story for me, but I would say that I really like took it and made it my own when I was a kid. I literally had a fantasy baseball team. My dad had a fantasy baseball league with all of his friends from high school and like grown men. These are like 30, 40-year-old men.
Why is that so cute?
And I had to have a team in the league. I demanded that I had to have my own team. And I'm sure like all the other guys were like, okay, Rich, like your little 8-year-old daughter does not need a team.
Why did I not know that?
Yeah,
I love that.
It's called the Bleeding Blue and Orange. We were not very successful, but that's not the point. Anyway, I've been obsessed literally since I was under the age of 10. So.
No, listen, it's so true. I always say, of course, there are those family connections. And once you're born into Mets fandom, I really feel like you just never break out of that. But we talk about it all the time. If you want to root for a team that consistently wins, there is a team that is not very far away from the Mets where you can do that.
Right across town.
Literally, being a Mets fan is a choice. And you know that it's a culture and a community that's built upon suffering. But for me, that honestly is all a part of it. Like that makes it so much fun. And I think there's very few fan bases that can truly relate to that. Just years upon years of quite honestly, some disappointment, some highs and lows, feeling all of the different emotions. But to me, being a Mets fan, it's a way of life. It's an experience. And I think that is what we're hoping is to hear from all of the fans who feel the same way.
It is. It's the classic sports franchise, right? That when they win, it's so good because they don't often win. And I think for a lot of fans too, like you, me, but everybody else as well, like it's an emotional experience. Like I remember the 2015 World Series. Granted, the Mets lost the World Series, but Game 3, David Wright hit that home run. I was 15 years old. I was sobbing, crying. Like it is an emotion. When things go well, because you don't get it often, right? So it makes it that much sweeter when it does. When
I think of Mets fans, the word grateful comes to mind. The word appreciative comes to mind. Loyal. I mean, this is a fan base that does not take any wins for granted. I did, by the way, do what you said to do and watch the 30 for 30 on ESPN Plus.
So good.
Just on the 1986 World Series, just all of it. And it really it made me realize even more just what this fan base is all about and how cheerful and eager people were to see them succeed. So again, we're so excited to have you here, and honestly, let's just dive into it. Talk a little bit of Mets. Also, of course, we want to know why you are a Mets fan, so let us know.
Let us know.
General thoughts. Right now, we are recording this on a Sunday, and for the most part, you can expect this will always be out by Tuesday morning, but quite honestly, we actually hope to bring you content a lot of the times on Monday or on a Monday morning or afternoon. So be looking for our episodes again on your favorite podcast platforms or YouTube. But here are our general thoughts. Right now, the Mets have an 18-20 record, and they are 4-6 out of those last 10 games. So the last Braves game of the series is tonight. We've already seen, the last 2 games. It wasn't great. I would feel a little bit better if they won 1 game tonight. But I guess what I would say just to start here is one of the bright spots from Saturday's game was JD Martinez breaking up the Braves' combined no-hit. I mean, that was actually just an electric feeling. And I love watching everybody cheer in Citi Field. Woohoo!
Listen, when there's a no-hitter going on and Gary Cohen's on the mic and you can tell he's like trying, whatever, the jinx, he's trying not to say it, but Max Fried was cooking Saturday against the Mets. Lineup was really just ice cold. Obviously, no hit through. Did Martinez hit that in the? Yeah, he hit that in the 9th. 2 outs in the 9th.
Outs.
They were so close. Now, I did hear funny stat. The Mets were no hit twice in 2015, which is the year they went to the World Series.
Mm-hmm.
So, whatever. It doesn't mean anything if they get no hit. But I do think there was a sense of relief with JD hitting that one over the wall.
Not to mention, this is someone who you spoke to just a couple weeks ago.
Absolutely. And I do want to play that interview here, even though it was a few weeks ago. It was his 2 games he played in Syracuse when he was getting ready. He missed most of spring training because he was signed in free agency so late. And he had some really interesting thoughts on that. He's a Scott Boras client, and he literally wasn't signed by the Mets until spring training was over. So he had to warm up in the minors this year. So I'm going to play a little clip of that interview right here just to, let you hear some interesting thoughts from JD.
I was very surprised. It was kind of sad on, the whole, I feel like baseball side of things. It's just, I feel like I had a really good year last year and I was deserving, to sign early and not sign a week before the team breaks or 2 days before the team breaks. And it was just unfortunate. I think it's kind of one of those things that's, bad for baseball when you have a lot of good players out there that are signing so late and players that can help teams win, and they're not signing and they're, essentially just kind of getting thrown into the fire at the last second. They were excited when I signed. I was excited when I signed, and then I got to spring training, and it's like, hey, everybody, what's up? Oh, they're packing their bags, and they're gone, So it's like, all right, I'll see you guys when I see you guys. So I think that's the biggest thing I'm excited about is, getting around the guys and trying to help and try to contribute, to them.
All right, so that was JD Martinez, obviously signed by the Mets in free agency this offseason, spent last year with the Dodgers. He is a guy who hit over 100 RBIs, 30 home runs last year for the Dodgers. He is getting up there in age, but listen, I think it's a great DH signing for the Mets this offseason. They really didn't have anyone to produce in that role last year. They kind of fluctuated between Daniel Vogelbach and some other characters, so I think that was a good signing in free agency.
Absolutely. And again, you look at the bad news and the bad side of things is that the Mets did lose again. And I don't know, my takeaway, one thing is, of course, I've seen this discussion a lot on Mets Twitter. It has been some pretty stiff competition through this first part of the year, and it's going to stay that way for a bit. So I feel like as a Mets fan, for me, it's about staying as close to 500 as they can right now, which is not an easy thing to do when the next team that you're facing is the Phillies. But what about you? What were your takeaways from this, series against the Braves?
I mean, listen, my overall takeaways from the first month and a half of the season is this is a first-year manager, right? Carlos Mendoza came from across town with the Yankees, but he's never been the manager of a team before, so there's going to be a learning curve, as in any sport. I think he's grown on me. I know you were also in the camp of, I was a little unsure with the Buck Showalter firing at the end of last season. I was not really on board with that. I thought Buck took the fall last year for some things that were out of his control.
Ditto.
As any manager does, but I don't know. I didn't love that firing. This year, now that I've seen Carlos Mendoza manage a month and a half, I'm a lot more into it. He's a younger presence. I feel like the guys relate to him a lot more than they did Buck. And he's fun, right? When they're winning, he's out there on the top step of the dugout. He's having fun with them. Of course, we'll see how the in-game decisions, continue along the line here. That learning curve is going to be there, like I said. But I don't know. I'm more of a Carlos Mendoza fan than I was in March. Let's just say that.
I have to say I agree with you, because that is one of the things that we have talked about in the past, even just offline, is the fact that, listen, they're having some struggles on the field. That being said, I really feel like the culture of the Mets is in a pretty great place right now. I like the way that all of them interact with each other. I love the young core of players who you're seeing. And it really does feel like they're all operating as one unit, kind of as a family. Like you're sort of getting this big brother, little brother vibe, which I feel like in a year like 2024 is important. Like, let's face it, I do feel like even, midway through last year, there was a conversation that happened where it was like, we're looking ahead to the future and 2025 is going to be a big year. But what does that mean for 2024 and this season? And I think that it's up to the guys that are on this team now to prove that and to see what they can do.
And I think it's going to be interesting. This is a conversation I'm sure we'll have later in the season, but to see how that older core, right, of Alonso, Jeff McNeil, Brandon Nimmo, Lindor is signed for forever, but that core of guys that's been here for, upwards of 5 years together, how they mentor the baby Mets, right? Brett Beatty, Francisco Alvarez, hurt now for a few weeks, but Vientos when he gets up. It's going to be interesting to see if nothing else comes out of 2024. Maybe it's a great learning experience for those baby Mets and maybe that older core. I don't know. We'll see what happens with them this offseason. That's another topic, but
I'm also not convinced that nothing is going to come out of 2024. And here's another bright spot and something that we've been looking at for quite some time, which is Christian Scott. He was, pitched into the 7th on Saturday in his Citi Field debut, gave up six hits, 3 runs, 2 walks, and struck out 8 batters. I was feeling like the conversation surrounding him was great. This was his second start with the Mets this year. In his first start, he also, again, it was 1-run ball. He did a great job. And this is our tweet of the week. By the way, this is a segment that we're going to do every week because we love Mets Twitter so much and following it. This one comes out from Jenna Ashlyn. And she said, you can tell by how excited this crowd is by Christian Scott that we just want him to be the guy so bad. There has been no the guy since DeGrom, and we're fiending for it. I feel like out of all people, that is something you can relate to. You kind of had a similar thought over the weekend.
Yeah, I actually tweeted something similar to that. But I think that's just the pulse of Mets fans overall, right? We were so spoiled for so many years. Obviously, we're on the younger side. I'm 23. You're 26. I knew that. But so the Mets historically, right, have been a franchise built on pitching. But younger Mets fans like ourselves have been spoiled. I mean, the recent golden age of Matt Harvey, Noah Syndergaard, Zach Wheeler, there was just 1 through 5. That rotation was more than formidable. So recently, that has not been the case. Pitching's been a little bit harder to come by after the trades of DeGrom and Scherzer out of town. So I think that Mets fans are just so eager to inject some life into this rotation. Obviously, Kodai Senga, he's on the IL, hoping for a June return. He looked like an ace last year, but Christian Scott, that younger presence, he was the Mets' number 5 prospect. He was actually a reliever in college at Florida before being switched to a starting pitcher after being drafted by the Mets in 2021. And I don't know about you, but I feel like personally, he was a name that really emerged kind of out of nowhere. I mean, I hesitate to say that because he was number 5 prospect when he got called up, tops in the system. But the last few years, I didn't hear his name a ton rising through the Mets system. So I think Mets fans, in conclusion, are really eager to have someone to make a DeGrom day, Harvey day, maybe a Christian Scott day. I don't know. I don't want him to get too overhyped because that's when things spiral down the tubes. But I would love to see that, and I think Mets fans would too.
Also, I have to say, best Twitter moment of the entire week was when they're showing his dad in the stands.
Oh my God, I know.
And how pumped up and excited he was for him. So again, there is a lot to be excited about. And here's something that we were debating is he up there for good now, or is he coming back down?
I think he's up there for good. Give us your thoughts in the comments, but I would... Just with the weakness of the rotation in the back half of it and Senga still on the IL, I think unless he has a couple of meltdowns, like if he gets shelled a couple times, I think this is a different conversation. But if he continues to put up even quality starts like he did yesterday, give up 2-3 runs, give him a chance in ball games, I think he's up for good just simply because they don't really have anybody else who's going to take a spot.
I am also curious to see. So definitely let us know in the comments what you have thought about his performance so far, and do you think he deserves to stay up there? Because we are very excited to hear your thoughts on that. We're also monitoring a couple of injuries, yes?
Yeah.
So we have Nimmo, who's day-to-day right now, with an how do you say that? Do you know?
Intercostal. Yeah, I heard Gary Cohen saying it yesterday.
Great. Well, we'll go. If Gary Cohen said it, then surely it's right. Which is a rib/midsection injury. So that's something that we're looking at right now. And he's not in the starting lineup tonight. So I guess that changes things at least a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, Nimmo's been honestly underperforming a little bit this season. He hasn't been hitting for that average OBP spot that you want at the top of your lineup. But a loss nonetheless. I heard him speak after the game yesterday in SNY's post-game interview, and he said he thinks he will be okay. It's day-to-day, but as a veteran, he knows that day-to-day things can turn into 6 to 8 weeks if you push him. So out of the lineup tonight, we'll see what happens. Hope he's okay.
Now, I'm seeing underneath that you wrote a bullet about Alonso, and I want you to read it because I'm curious. When was this reported? I honestly don't know that.
I believe in the last couple of days, I think Friday or Saturday.
Okay. Let it rip.
Joel Sherman of the New York Post. It was reported that Alonso, I touched on the older core a little while ago. Obviously, Alonso in his walk here, it was reported by Joel Sherman that he turned down a 7-year, $158 million offer this offseason from the Mets and is kind of heading towards testing those waters in free agency. I believe he's represented by Scott Boras as well. I'm like 98% on that. And I have some thoughts on that. I know Mets fans have some thoughts on that. Alonso's 29. He turns 30 in December. In his walk year, like I mentioned, this year, come out of the gate, not hitting for that average, right? 215, 20 RBI, 9 home runs so far. I think with a guy like Alonso, he is a first baseman. Obviously, he has been since he came up. I think likely he turns into a DH at some point here along the line as he continues to get older. Do I think he's past his prime? I don't know. Do I think he's past hitting for average and that type of stuff? Not that he ever really hit for average, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is he maybe going to live in that 220 realm and still put up 40 home runs a year? I think that's possible. And I think what I also saw from a lot of Mets fans on Twitter is he wants like Lindor type of money. I don't know if he's worth Lindor type of money, to be honest with you.
Yeah. You know what? That part I would definitely say that I agree with, but it is tough, right? It's like, I don't know. It's so hard for me to picture a version of this Mets team without him on it. He does feel like a critical component, even just from a culture standpoint.
I agree.
Like I love even the energy he brings. I love the way that he is involved in the community. I feel like he is truly like a New York guy. I think he just represents the state and the team well. But listen, like you said, there are obviously decisions to be made. And I feel like, as we all know, even just from last year, sometimes the money also just isn't everything. Like at the end of the day, you just really need talented people to win. And I do think he is a really special talent, but we'll just have to see what happens with that. Kind of moving on to what is to come. Outside of this game against the Braves, the Mets then go into a series that is not going to be easy, which is against the Phillies, which, by the way, you'll be hearing more about this, is our boss's team. So we will definitely be roasting. Get familiar with the name Sean Carroll. That's our boss.
Maybe we'll have him on as a guest to talk about the Phillies.
To roast him about the Phillies.
Yeah.
But this is a team that has been playing lights out, on fire. They're currently 28-13 as of Sunday night when we're recording this. The best team in the NL East and truly one of the hottest teams in baseball. Not an easy draw.
Listen, I said this before.
Wait, it was the sigh. It was the sigh.
As I said before, I grew up in the heart of Phillies country.
I mean,
grew
that's
up
tough.
like north of Philadelphia, outside of Doylestown, PA, if anyone knows what that is. It was
all
Phillies
hats,
country. It was
all jerseys,
everyone I went to
everything.
school with. Like in 2008 when they won the World Series, I mean, I was surprised school wasn't canceled, quite frankly. Everybody went to the parade. It was brutal. I personally, tell me how you feel about this, because I think this is an interesting debate among Mets fans. I hate the Phillies. I think the Phillies are a bigger rival to the Mets than the Yankees. Now, I understand the traditionalists, the Yankee, the crosstown. I get it. The Subway Series, I understand. But I think in terms of throughout the season, I hate the Phillies more. And why is that? Probably because the Phillies have had such success recently, right? They go to the World Series last year. They lose in the World Series. But the Phillies have been good the last few years. That's just, we have to admit that. I can't stand the Phillies. I can't stand Bryce Harper. I hate the Phillies.
I feel the 100%. I would be curious. Like, let's hear your power rankings of your top 3 teams that, as a Mets fan, you hate the most. We've talked about that before. I definitely, I mean, the Phillies or honestly even the Braves just as of recent, I told you this before and you said you disagree with me on this. This is just the way I feel. I'm being honest. If the Mets were out of the playoffs and the Yankees were in it, as a New Yorker, I'd root for the Yankees.
No.
You said you'd never do that.
No. Sacrilegious.
You said you'd root against them.
No.
That's just me. Let's come at me in the comments or come at Ashley. I don't know. I just feel like I would rather root for New York at that point.
Unless it was what was it, 2000? Was it 2008 or 2010 that was the Phillies Yankees? Then I would root for the Yankees only in that scenario.
So that is the only scenario where fine, fair, hey, fair enough. I totally understand that. But yeah, I would definitely say the Phillies or the Braves are just gonna rub me more the wrong way. Quite honestly, I just feel more hatred in my heart. Go ahead.
What is your what is your tier? What is your 1, 2, 3 most hated?
That is good. That is good. Right now, just in my I think there, and I'm admitting there is recency bias in this.
Okay.
But right now, in the way I'm feeling, I would go Braves first, and then Phillies. And then if there is a third, they're not coming. If these are the two tiers that are the highest, the third is much lower.
Okay.
What about you?
Mine is probably Phillies, Braves, but Phillies 1, most hated, Braves 2, Yankees 3. But I will admit there's some location bias on that because I grew up in Phillies country. The Braves are recently, the Braves have been, I think, more of a thorn in the Mets side, especially winding down August, September, those games.
Right. Just in the past few years, it's just, it's heart-wrenching. Yeah. It is knife stabbing. It is all of that adjectives that you could possibly use. But it is funny. I will say this, now that I'm thinking about it, I will say, even my brother told me that recently for a company event, he's like, yeah, my boss is taking me to a baseball game. I'm like, oh, which game? He's like, oh, Yankees versus blah, blah, blah. I'm like, that's not a stadium where our family goes. So I will say, I don't know that I honestly would, even as a casual fan, I think it'd be really tough for me to go to a Yankees game. But I don't know why. For some reason in the playoffs, for some reason I feel like New York. I don't know. I don't know why I feel that way.
I went to the Subway Series last summer in I think July at Yankee Stadium because I'd never been. I'm trying to do all the ballparks, whatever. Mm-hmm. But they were playing the Mets, so I was a much happier camper. The Mets won that night, so I was fine. But yeah, Yankees fans to me are just cocky and a whole lot of other adjectives we can leave out.
We can leave. I know we've been deciding whether or not we're allowed to curse on this, so stand by. and if we end up finding out we can curse, you'll know about it in the next few weeks. Anyway, this is my ideal situation for the next week. Okay,
Let's hear
the
it.
Mets. This is what I would feel. I would feel happy with this.
Yeah.
The Mets win tonight. Mm-hmm. Which I understand is a tall task, but the Mets win tonight.
I would like them to win tonight.
I would like them to win tonight. I would like them to win every night, but this is what I would want. The Mets win tonight, and somehow, especially because they are at Citi Field for this Phillies series, we should mention, they win. I would be okay with winning 1 out of 3. I'd be pleased with 2 out of 3. Because then they go into their next series against the Marlins, one of the worst teams in baseball right now, with a .500 record. I really feel like in this early part of the season, I wish I remembered the tweet, but there was a tweet that was essentially saying that the Mets schedule gets easier the more that we get into the summer. So I do just feel like staying close to that .500 mark is important, even from a mental standpoint. It's important for the fans.
Yeah, it's important for morale. I agree with you. I think, this season started off so rough. What was it, 0-6, 0-5 start? And
That's
then
crazy.
Yeah.
Honestly, I forgot about that until you met. Isn't that odd?
But then they heated up for a while.
know.
If you recall, they faced the Royals, who were scorching hot at the time. I believe swept the Royals. Then went out to the West Coast, had a good West Coast trip against the Dodgers, the Giants. Then since then, it's been a little bit downhill. They've fallen under 500 again. So I think that they can compete with some of these teams. I don't know. The Mets roster as a whole this year, I think the depth is starting to go already with some of the injuries. Alvarez out for a few months. Nimmo, hopefully he's okay. But I don't know. I think I would like to see them win 2 out of 3 against the Phillies. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they will. I would like to see that. I think this Mets season, and I think a lot of Mets fans probably agree with this, I'm not going to have a full read on it until closer to the All-Star break, closer to that first week of July, last week of June. And I think that's going to be interesting to see what the team does as well, the front office and Steve Cohen, and if we're buyers, if we're sellers, the whole debate, is there enough reason to be buyers? We'll see what type of position they're in come, a month from now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to try not to do like 5 questions per episode, but there's one more I'm going to let rip because I am curious. Like, I want to know, for the fans and for viewers who are watching this, what are your expectations for the 2024 season? And maybe rather, what would you be content with as the outcome? I'd be curious to hear that, especially because we are in the earlier part of the season. Final thoughts on the Mets, where they're at, where they're going, and then we're going to jump to the Syracuse Mets, which we will do every single week.
Yeah, I think the bats have cooled off a bit. I would like to see most everyone in that lineup start producing offense more consistently on a night-to-night basis. I think the pitching, honestly, pitching was the area that a lot of fans were concerned about heading into the season. I think the pitching has held its own a little bit more than maybe even expected. Hasn't been great, hasn't been perfect by any means, but it's kept them in games for the most part. So I think the lineup that on paper should produce, right? That's a lineup on paper that has a lot of veterans, should be producing. I would like to see the lineup heat up a bit, and I think that would make a world of a difference.
Okay. Well, we will have to just see what happens, and we will, of course, have more for you next week. But we want to just dive into the Syracuse Mets, and since this is our first episode, we're going to keep it sort of general. But I remember having this down from when we were doing some of our trial episodes earlier. And this was a roster. I just have to list some of these off. This was on opening day, so granted, some things have changed since then. But this was a roster that on opening day, included 19 players with MLB experience, the top Mets pitching prospect in Christian Scott, 3 of the top 5 overall prospects, including Drew Gilbert, as well as Luis Angel Acuna, who is, of course, the 22-year-old shortstop and younger brother of the reigning National League MVP, Ronald Acuna Jr. Lastly, a former Golden Glove winner in Yolmer Sanchez. So there is a lot of talent on here, folks. There are a lot of names who you should be caring about. And that's what we hope to bring you every time that we talk about the Syracuse Mets. Again, it's going to be less X's and O's and the records and more about, if you're a Mets fan, these are the people who you should be interested in right now. And these are the people who you could be seeing in Queens, or you may have already, as soon as this year. So we will be having on guests who hopefully at some point will be on the Mets, for the rest of their careers.
Yeah, and we get to talk to them before they make it to Queens, which I think is a bit of a unique perspective as well. I know SNY, touches on the Syracuse Mets, but there's really not as much of a beat to it as I think maybe there should be with all this talent on this team. Like you mentioned, Acuna, Mark Viento's back down. He got called up briefly, but he is back down with the Syracuse Mets now. We did get to speak to Drew Gilbert a little bit before opening day, so I'm excited to continue that this season. And yeah, the Syracuse Mets, like you said, it's not like we're monitoring the score every night necessarily. Like, it's not like we, on a week-to-week basis, are going to bring you, game-by-game analysis. But just hearing those voices, I think, in Syracuse is a unique perspective that I personally really enjoy, and I think other Mets fans would as well.
No doubt. We want to make sure that you're excited about the future. If you are curious, though, their record right now is 21-15 on the year at the time we're recording this. And a couple people who I know have stuck out to both of us so far through the season. Luis Angel Acuna is awesome. He leads the team in runs with 26. You have Ben Gamel, who's their right fielder. He leads the team in hits. He also has the best batting average on the team, batting .327. Last but not least, their current home run leader, Trace Thompson, the center fielder, with 7. So those are 3 guys who I think are pretty much consistently guys who we have our eyes on.
Yeah, I think Acuna gets the most attention, right? Not only because he might be the most talented, but also because of his brother, just the expectations there. But yeah, I'm excited to see how they shape out. I also think with this Mets team, the big club, we'll see how the summer goes. But if the summer maybe doesn't go the direction we all want it to, and in August, September, we're playing some meaningless games, you could see a lot of these guys up in Queens for their first cup, or maybe even if we are playing meaningful games. But I think, if the Mets are out of contention, you are for sure going to see maybe half the Syracuse Mets roster up in Queens, get some cups of coffee, try out some new things. I don't know, all the typical things that clubs do when they're out of contention.
You will see them up in Queens, and you will see them here on this podcast. We are also going to be trying to bring in coaches, the play-by-play broadcasters, other guests, or interesting people who we think could provide some perspective and analysis. So if there's anyone who you want to see, players, coaches, or otherwise, certainly let us know. And again, we will be partnering with the Syracuse Mets. They know about this. They're excited to partner with us on this because they really, we haven't really had an experience like this, and there's no other place in Syracuse that's going to be covering the team as closely as we will be. Final thoughts on anything that you want to let rip.
Final thoughts. It's what time is it? It's 7:45 on Sunday night.
Yep.
I'm a little eager to go check that Mets score on Sunday Night Baseball right now. So
we gotta go.
Anyway, I gotta go. But no, just kidding. This was great. I'm excited to get this off the ground and really bring fans consistent content on a week-to-week basis, not only with those Syracuse Mets names, but also just our takes on the New York Mets. And I'm excited to see where this summer takes us and where this summer takes this podcast.
My final thought is this. Let us also know just anything else that you want to see behind the scenes. We do this podcast on the side because we think it's something that's really fun and really exciting, and we simply could not turn it down when the idea was brought to us. But there's also a lot of other things we do here too. We sports anchor, sports report. We work in studios and on the news stations. And we have another podcast called The Orange Zone that talks about Syracuse sports. So if you're interested in any of that, or you want to see any of our behind the scenes content, we're happy to show you it on all of our, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, social media platforms. And you'll be meeting intern Dan soon. So most importantly, let's go Mets. Thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye from the Sky Cam if we're on that. And we will plan on seeing you next week. Thanks for joining us.